The sun was setting over the rugged terrain of the Wyoming Territory in 1878, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson, as Tessa Lawson clutched the reins of her wagon with white knuckles, unaware that the next few moments would forever alter the course of her life. The two horses pulling her wagon had grown skittish as the trail narrowed along the ridge, the wheels precariously close to the edge of a steep drop. Tessa, 22 and traveling alone after burying her father in Cheyenne, was making her way to her aunt's ranch near Laramie when the ground beneath the right wheels suddenly crumbled away. "Whoa," she cried, yanking the reins in desperation, but it was too late. The wagon tilted sharply, and for one terrible moment, Tessa felt suspended in air. Then gravity took hold, and the wagon plunged over the edge, tumbling down the rocky slope. The horses broke free from their harnesses, leaving the wagon to crash into the ravine below. Lucas Donovan was tracking a wounded deer when he heard the splintering of wood and a woman's scream echoing through the valley. The 30-year-old cowboy abandoned his hunt without a second thought, urging his chestnut stallion toward the sound. As he crested a ridge, he spotted the aftermath, a wagon smashed at the bottom of a ravine, its contents scattered across the rocky ground. "Hello," he called out, dismounting and securing his horse to a nearby juniper tree. "Anyone down there?" A faint moan answered him. Lucas wasted no time, carefully making his way down the steep embankment, loose rocks sliding beneath his boots. His heart hammered in his chest as he approached the wreckage, expecting the worst. The wagon lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily. As Lucas drew closer, he spotted a woman's arm protruding from beneath the canvas covering that had partially collapsed. "Madam, can you hear me?" he called, kneeling beside the wagon and carefully lifting the heavy fabric. Tessa's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dazed. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her dress was torn and soiled. "The horses," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't you worry about them horses now," Lucas said, assessing the situation. The wagon's frame had buckled, and Tessa was pinned beneath a wooden trunk. "I need to get you out of here. Can you move your legs?" Tessa tried and winced. "I think so, but I'm trapped." Lucas set his jaw determinedly. "I'll have you out in no time, madam." He braced himself against the wagon and pushed with all his might, creating just enough space for Tessa to slide free. As she emerged, Lucas noticed the crimson stain spreading across her shoulder. "You're bleeding pretty badly," he observed, quickly tearing a strip from his own shirt to create a makeshift bandage. "This'll have to do until we get you to proper help." Tessa's face was pale from blood loss and shock, but she managed a weak nod. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan." "Lucas Donovan," he replied, wrapping the cloth around her wounded shoulder. "And you are—" "Tessa Lawson," she said through gritted teeth as he tightened the bandage. Lucas surveyed the steep ravine walls. "Miss Lawson, I hate to say it, but there's no way to get that wagon out of here, and you're in no condition to ride alone. My cabin's about 3 miles from here. I can take you there, tend to your wounds properly, and then figure out what to do next." Tessa hesitated, aware of the impropriety of going to a stranger's home alone, but the throbbing pain in her shoulder and the dizziness overtaking her left little choice. "I suppose I don't have many options, Mr. Donovan. Call me Lucas," he said, gently helping her to her feet. She swayed dangerously, and he caught her before she could fall. "Easy now. Let me see if I can salvage any of your belongings first." He managed to retrieve her small trunk of personal items and a satchel containing documents and what felt like money. Then, with Tessa leaning heavily against him, they began the arduous climb up the ravine wall. Each step sent shooting pain through Tessa's body, and halfway up, her legs gave out entirely. Without a word, Lucas swept her into his arms. "Hold onto my neck," he instructed, his voice gentle but firm. Tessa complied, too exhausted and hurt to protest. The setting sun cast long shadows as Lucas finally reached his horse. With careful movements, he lifted Tessa onto the saddle, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist to keep her from falling. "Stay with me, Miss Lawson," he urged as her head lolled against his chest. "Just a little while longer." Lucas's cabin appeared as twilight deepened into night, a sturdy one-room structure with a small corral for his horses. Inside, it was simple but clean, with a bed in one corner, a table and chairs in another, and a stone fireplace that provided both heat and a place to cook. He lit a lamp and eased Tessa onto his bed, then quickly built a fire. Once the cabin began to warm, he gathered clean cloths, a basin of water, and a bottle of whiskey. "This will hurt," he warned as he began cleaning her wounds. The gash on her forehead was superficial, but her shoulder injury was deep. "Looks like a piece of the wagon splintered and caught you good." Tessa flinched as the whiskey-soaked cloth touched her raw flesh. "Are you a doctor, Mr. Donovan?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the pain. Lucas smiled faintly. "No, madam, just a cowboy who's patched up his fair share of injuries. Spent some time as an army scout and learned a few things about keeping folks alive in rough country." As he worked, Tessa studied his face, strong jawline covered in several days' worth of beard, eyes the color of a summer sky, and lines around his mouth that suggested he smiled often. Despite her pain, she felt strangely safe in his care. "What brings a lady like yourself out to these parts alone?" Lucas asked as he stitched her shoulder with a steady hand. "My father died last month. Consumption," she explained, wincing as the needle pierced her skin. "I was heading to my aunt's ranch near Laramie. She's the only family I have left." Lucas nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry about your pa. These territories can be mighty hard on folks." "And you?" Tessa asked. "What made you choose such a solitary life?" A shadow crossed his face. "War changes a man. After Shiloh and what came after, I found I preferred the company of mountains to most people." He tied off the final stitch. "There, not the prettiest needlework, but it'll hold." Tessa's eyelids grew heavy as exhaustion overtook her. Lucas noticed and pulled a quilt over her. "Rest now. We'll figure everything else out come morning." When Tessa woke, pale sunlight filtered through the cabin's single window. She found herself alone, dressed in an oversized shirt that must have belonged to Lucas, her own blood-stained dress nowhere in sight. For a moment, panic seized her, but then the door opened and Lucas entered carrying a pail of fresh milk. "Good morning," he said, setting down the bucket. "Thought you might sleep the day away. How's that shoulder feeling?" Tessa moved experimentally and winced. "Sore, but better than yesterday." "Did you change my clothes?" A flush crept up Lucas's neck. "Had to. Your dress was soaked through with blood and I needed to check for other injuries. I was respectful." He busied himself pouring milk into a pot. "Hope you don't mind, but I washed your dress. It's drying outside." Tessa should have been scandalized, but somehow she wasn't. There was something about Lucas Donovan that inspired trust. "Thank you for everything." Over a breakfast of cornbread and wild honey, Lucas outlined his plan. "There's a settlement about 10 miles north of here. I can ride there today, send word to your aunt, and arrange for transport to get you to Laramie." "That's very kind, but I can't impose further. If you could just help me get to the settlement, Miss Lawson," Lucas interrupted. "You took 27 stitches last night. You're in no condition to travel, even the short distance to town. Let me help." The intensity in his blue eyes made Tessa's protest die on her lips. "All right," she conceded, "but please call me Tessa." Lucas smiled, transforming his rugged features. "Tessa it is." After breakfast, Lucas showed her where he kept his books, a small but carefully curated collection, and made sure she had everything she needed before saddling his horse. As he prepared to leave, Tessa stood in the doorway, the borrowed shirt making her look even more vulnerable. "I'll be back before sundown," he promised. "Bar the door while I'm gone." Tessa nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Be careful." Left alone, Tessa explored the cabin further. Despite its simplicity, it revealed much about its owner. A well-worn Bible sat beside the bed. On the mantel stood a tintype photograph of a younger Lucas in a Union Army uniform, standing beside another soldier with a similar jawline, a brother, perhaps. A beautifully carved chess set occupied one corner of the table, pieces arranged mid-game, as if Lucas played against himself. By afternoon, her strength returning, Tessa decided to wash her hair in the basin. As she combed through the tangles, she heard hoofbeats approaching too soon for it to be Lucas returning from town. Heart pounding, she grabbed the rifle Lucas had left by the door and positioned herself where she could see through the window. 3 riders approached, rough-looking men whose appearances set off warning bells in Tessa's mind. They dismounted and strode toward the cabin with the confidence of men accustomed to taking what they wanted. "Hello, the cabin," the leader called out. "Donovan, you in there?" Tessa remained silent, the rifle ready in her hands. "We know you're in there, Donovan," another voice shouted. The Blackburn boys don't take kindly to being made fools of. When no response came, the third man said, "Maybe he ain't here, Jasper." "His horse is gone," the leader Jasper observed, "but smoke's coming from the chimney. Someone's inside." He banged on the door. "Open up." Tessa steadied the rifle. "Mr. Donovan isn't here," she called out, trying to keep her voice strong. "Please leave the property." A moment of surprised silence followed. "Well, well," Jasper said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Donovan's got himself a woman." "Ain't that interesting, boys?" I said. "Leave," Tessa repeated, her finger hovering near the trigger. "Now, little lady," Jasper continued, "we've got business with Donovan. He cost us a mighty fine prize at the poker table in Sweetwater last month. We're just here to collect what's owed." "There's nothing for you here," Tessa insisted. "And I'm armed." Laughter greeted her words. "Hear that, boys? The little lady's armed," more pounding on the door. "We're coming in, sweetheart, one way or another." Just as the men began throwing their shoulders against the door, the sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the air. Tessa peered through the window to see Lucas approaching from behind the men, his Winchester aimed steadily. "Step away from my door, Blackburn," Lucas commanded, his voice like steel. "Unless you're eager to meet your maker today." The 3 men froze, then slowly turned. "Donovan," Jasper acknowledged, "was just coming to settle our debt." "There is no debt," Lucas replied coldly. "You lost fair and square, and we both know it. Now get on your horses and ride out, or I start putting holes in you." A tense standoff ensued, broken when Jasper spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Donovan. It is for today," Lucas countered. "Ride." The 3 men mounted their horses, Jasper fixing Lucas with a venomous glare before they galloped away. Only when they were out of sight did Lucas lower his rifle and approach the cabin. Tessa unbarred the door, relief flooding through her as Lucas stepped inside. "You're back early." "Good thing, too," he replied, setting down his rifle. "The Blackburn boys are trouble. They've been sore ever since I won a prize horse off them in a poker game." He studied her face. "You all right? They didn't harm you?" "No, I'm fine," Tessa assured him. "Just a bit shaken." Lucas nodded, then produced a telegram from his pocket. "I sent word to your aunt. She was mighty relieved to hear you're alive. She wants to come fetch you herself, but it'll take 3 days for her to arrange things and get here. 3 more days with Lucas." Tessa should have been dismayed at the impropriety, but instead she felt a flutter of something like anticipation. "I hope that's acceptable," Lucas added, misinterpreting her silence. "If not, I could try to find another way." "No," Tessa interrupted. That's fine, thank you." That evening, after a simple supper of rabbit stew, Lucas taught Tessa to play chess. Sitting across the small table, their faces illuminated by lamplight, Tessa found herself studying his hands, strong but gentle, as they moved the carved pieces across the board. When their fingers accidentally brushed, a jolt of awareness passed between them, and Lucas quickly withdrew his hand. "Your move," he said, his voice rougher than before. As the evening wore on, Tessa learned more about Lucas's past. He'd fought for the Union, lost his brother at Gettysburg, and wandered west after the war ended. He'd worked as a ranch hand, a scout, and occasionally as a bounty hunter before settling in this remote cabin 2 years ago. "And no one waits for you somewhere?" Tessa asked. "No sweetheart or wife?" Lucas shook his head, never found the right woman willing to share this kind of life. He studied the chessboard. "What about you? No beau crying over your departure from Cheyenne?" Tessa smiled wryly. "Pa was protective, said most men weren't worth the trouble they'd bring." "Smart man, your pa," Lucas observed with a small smile. "Most of us aren't." That night, despite Tessa's protests, Lucas again insisted she take the bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. As she drifted off to sleep, Tessa found herself wondering what it might be like to have Lucas beside her instead of across the room. The next morning, Lucas announced they needed supplies. "I know you're still healing, but the fresh air might do you good. Feel up to a short ride." Eager to escape the confines of the cabin, Tessa agreed. Lucas helped her into her now mended dress, his fingers lingering at the small buttons along her back. Neither mentioned the intimacy of the moment, but something had shifted between them, a current of awareness that hadn't been there before. Lucas lifted her onto his horse with ease, then mounted behind her as they had that first night. But now, instead of pain and fear, Tessa felt only the solid warmth of his chest against her back and his steady breathing near her ear. The small trading post was a half-hour ride away, a collection of rough buildings serving the scattered homesteaders in the area. As they approached, several people stopped to stare. Lucas Donovan was known for keeping to himself, and the sight of him with a beautiful young woman caused quite a stir. "Don't mind them," Lucas murmured as he helped Tessa dismount. "News is scarce out here. We're the most exciting thing to happen in months." Inside the trading post, a heavy-set man with mutton chop whiskers greeted them. "Donovan, twice in 2 days, must be some kind of record." His curious gaze fell on Tessa. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Miss Lawson," Lucas replied. "Her wagon went off the ridge road. She's staying with me until her aunt arrives from Laramie." The man's eyebrows shot up, but a warning look from Lucas prevented any inappropriate comments. "Well, Miss Lawson, welcome to Tucker's Trading Post. Anything you need, you just ask old Sam Tucker." As Lucas gathered supplies, Tessa browsed the small selection of goods. She paused at a display of hair combs, admiring a simple but pretty tortoiseshell piece. "You should get it," came a female voice beside her. Tessa turned to find a woman about her own age, dressed in a practical calico dress, her belly rounded with pregnancy. "I'm Martha Finley. My husband runs the smithy next door." "Tessa Lawson," she replied, shaking the offered hand. Martha glanced over at Lucas, who was deep in conversation with Sam Tucker. "Is it true you're staying at Donovan's cabin?" Tessa felt herself flush. "It's not. He rescued me from a wagon accident. I was badly hurt." Martha nodded, but her eyes twinkled with interest. "Lucas Donovan has kept to himself since he arrived in these parts. Never seen him bring anyone to town before, let alone a pretty girl." She lowered her voice. "Half the unmarried women around here have set their caps for him, but he's never shown interest." Before Tessa could respond, Lucas appeared at her side, packages tucked under his arm. "Ready to head back?" he asked, nodding politely to Martha. "Lucas bought you the comb," Martha informed Tessa with a knowing smile. "Wouldn't even let me wrap it." Tessa looked up at Lucas in surprise, but he merely offered his arm. "Shall we?" On the ride back, Tessa found the courage to ask, "Why did you buy me the comb?" Lucas was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I saw you looking at it. Thought it might make you happy." A pause, simple as that, but Tessa suspected there was nothing simple about it at all. That afternoon, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in, trapping them in the cabin. As rain lashed against the windows and thunder boomed overhead, Lucas built up the fire and brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. "Storms like this remind me of my childhood in Tennessee," he said, pouring Tessa a cup. "My ma used to say the thunder was God moving his furniture around in heaven." Tessa smiled, accepting the steaming mug. "My father said it was angels bowling." They sat side by side before the fire, their shoulders nearly touching as the storm raged outside. Tessa felt a strange peace in this moment, as if she and Lucas existed in a world apart from time and convention. "Tell me about your aunt," Lucas said eventually. "What kind of woman is she?" "Aunt Margaret is formidable," Tessa replied with a fond smile. "She came west as a bride 20 years ago, and when Uncle William died, she took over the ranch herself rather than sell it. She raises some of the finest horses in the territory." "Sounds like a woman who knows her own mind," Lucas observed, "like her niece." Tessa glanced at him, surprised by the compliment. "I'm not sure I'm as brave as Aunt Margaret." "Aren't you?" Lucas challenged gently. "You were traveling alone across dangerous country. You stood your ground against the Blackburn boys. Seems pretty brave to me." The firelight cast a golden glow over his features, and Tessa found herself drawn to him in a way that both frightened and exhilarated her. When Lucas reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingered on her cheek. "Tessa," he whispered, her name a question on his lips. She answered by closing the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened. Lucas's arms encircled her, careful of her injured shoulder, drawing her closer until she was nearly in his lap. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, though he made no move to release her. "Why not?" Tessa asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You're in my care. It's not right to take advantage." Tessa laughed softly. "Is that what you're doing, taking advantage? Because from where I'm sitting, I kissed you first." A smile tugged at his lips. "Still, you're leaving in 2 days." The reminder sobered Tessa. "Yes," she agreed. "I am." They remained by the fire as the storm gradually subsided, neither willing to break the spell that had fallen over them. That night, when Lucas prepared his bedroll, Tessa called out to him, "Lucas, I'm cold." He looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Tessa, we shouldn't." "I'm not asking for anything improper," she clarified. "Just hold me, please." After a moment's hesitation, Lucas crossed to the bed and stretched out beside her on top of the quilt while she remained beneath it. He drew her into his arms, and Tessa rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "This is dangerous," Lucas murmured into her hair. "I know," Tessa replied, already drifting toward sleep. "I don't care." The next morning, they awoke still entwined, Lucas having slipped under the covers sometime during the night. The intimacy of waking in his arms should have embarrassed Tessa, but instead it felt right, as if they had done this 100 mornings before. Lucas cooked breakfast, stealing glances at Tessa as she sat at the table wearing his shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders. Neither mentioned the coming parting, choosing instead to savor each moment together. After breakfast, Lucas changed the bandage on Tessa's shoulder, his fingers gentle against her skin. "It's healing well," he noted, "no sign of infection." "Thanks to your care," Tessa replied, catching his hand in hers. "Lucas, what happens tomorrow?" he sighed, sitting back on his heels. "Your aunt arrives, you go to Laramie, life returns to what it was before." "And if I don't want that?" Tessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas's eyes met hers, hope and caution warring in their depths. "What are you saying, Tessa?" "I'm saying that in 3 days you've become more important to me than I thought possible. I'm saying I don't want to leave you." Lucas stood, pacing the small confines of the cabin. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," Tessa insisted, rising to face him. "I know you're kind and brave and gentle. I know you read Shakespeare and play chess against yourself. I know you make me feel safe in a way I never have before. Your aunt will understand. She married for love against her family's wishes. She'll respect my choice." Tessa took a deep breath. "If you want me to stay, that is." Lucas stopped pacing, his expression tormented. "Tessa, I live in a one-room cabin miles from anywhere. I have little to offer a woman like you." "You offer yourself," Tessa replied simply. "That's all I want." Lucas crossed to her in 2 strides, gathering her in his arms with a fierce tenderness that took her breath away. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her face. "Truly sure," Tessa nodded, her heart too full for words. Their kiss sealed a promise between them, one made not in haste, but in the quiet certainty of 2 souls recognizing something rare and precious. The following day, Margaret Lawson arrived in a smart buggy driven by her ranch foreman. A tall, handsome woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, she embraced Tessa with tears in her eyes. "When I didn't hear from you, I feared the worst," she said, examining her niece's face. "You look well for someone who tumbled down a ravine." "Thanks to Mr. Donovan," Tessa replied, gesturing to Lucas, who stood respectfully nearby. Margaret assessed him with shrewd eyes. "You saved my niece's life, Mr. Donovan. The Lawsons pay their debts. Name your price." Lucas shook his head. "No price, madam. Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't, you did." Margaret turned back to Tessa. "Your things are packed. We should start back before midday if we want to make good time." Tessa exchanged a glance with Lucas. "Aunt Margaret, I need to speak with you privately." Inside the cabin, Tessa explained everything: the accident, Lucas's care, and the feelings that had grown between them. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. "You want to stay with him," she stated when Tessa finished. "A man you've known less than a week." "Yes," Tessa admitted. "I know it sounds mad." "It doesn't," Margaret interrupted. "Your uncle proposed to me 3 days after we met. I accepted on the spot." She smiled faintly. "The heart knows what it wants often before the head catches up." Relief flooded through Tessa. "Then you understand." "I understand, but I have conditions." Margaret's tone brooked no argument. "First, you'll be properly married before you set up house together. Second, you'll both come to the ranch for the ceremony and stay at least a month. I want to know the man my niece has chosen." She eyed the small cabin. "And third, Mr. Donovan will need to build a proper home for my niece. This dwelling is insufficient." Tessa hugged her aunt tightly. "Thank you." When they emerged from the cabin, Lucas stood waiting anxiously. Margaret approached him with regal bearing. "Mr. Donovan, it seems my niece has decided to throw her lot in with yours." Lucas nodded, his eyes on Tessa. "If you'll permit it, madam." "I'm not giving permission," Margaret corrected. "Tessa is old enough to make her own choices, but I am giving conditions." She outlined her terms, fixing Lucas with a stern gaze. "Are these acceptable to you?" "More than acceptable," Lucas replied. "I'd planned to ask for Tessa's hand properly once I was sure of her feelings." "And are you sure now?" Margaret asked, one eyebrow raised. Lucas's gaze never left Tessa's face. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." 1 year later, Tessa Donovan stood on the porch of a newly built 2-story home, watching as Lucas rode in from checking the cattle. Their small ranch, built on land adjoining Margaret's property, was thriving under their joint care. As Lucas dismounted and strode toward her, Tessa placed a hand on her slightly rounded belly. They had discovered the pregnancy just 2 weeks earlier, and the joy on Lucas's face when she told him still warmed her heart. "How are my girls doing?" Lucas asked, climbing the steps to take Tessa in his arms. "How do you know it's a girl?" Tessa teased, returning his embrace. "Just a feeling," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "But boy or girl doesn't matter as long as they're healthy and have their mother's spirit." Tessa smiled up at her husband, "and their father's heart." As the sun set over the Wyoming Territory, painting the sky in familiar hues of amber and crimson, Tessa thought of that fateful day when her wagon had rolled into the ravine. What had seemed like disaster had led her to this moment, to this man, to a love she hadn't known existed. Lucas, as if reading her thoughts, wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hand covering hers over their growing child. "Any regrets?" he murmured against her ear. Tessa leaned back into his solid strength, content in the knowledge that some accidents were really beginnings in disguise. "Not a single one,"